Hey guys.
Hello. How's it going, Alex?
We're here to talk about agentic AI and all the things that it has to offer. What's great about talking to you both is that we're really looking at sort of different parts of the stack. We're looking at very different offerings of where the AI agent world is headed. So I thought I'd begin with you, David, is that basically your company, Read AI, is there for enterprises, is there for people to, note-taking apps. I thought you could just sort of describe a little bit how you are entering the agentic space.
Yeah, I think we started back in 2021. We do meeting notes. The way that we do meeting notes is really, it's an early agent. It goes to the meeting on your behalf. It joins the call as a participant. It says, hey, I'm Read AI. I'm going to take notes. And it starts to go in and take notes both in real time and after the fact. And what it does is it actually doesn't just take the notes, but it looks at how people reacted to the words that were said. So if people in this audience started to get really bored, took out their phone, it would go in and say engagement is low. And it would start to go in and say, uh-oh. Yep. And it'll drop that down, versus when everyone starts to pay attention, when Alex starts talking, they might be like, oh, this is really interesting. You start to lean in. We'll pick up how people reacted. And so the agent's responsibility is not just to write down the words, but to actually take into account how people receive those words. And that changes the summary from like, hey, how was your vacation, to, oh, this product, are we going to actually close that deal in the next 3 days?
That opens so many doors. But I want to hear about your side of the agentic story.
So I guess a little bit of context. The people that I tend to help tend to be the world's largest businesses. So I think the G2K, so examples are all of the electric car companies in the US, whitehouse.gov gets protected transitively with Redpanda. Wow. And so in like large-scale enterprises, what we are seeing is sort of the difficulty for adopting agents. And I guess it's also worth saying, like, what is my definition of an agent?
Yeah.
So I think it'll be useful for context. Is I tend to align with the definition of Anthropic, which is an LLM that is in charge of its end-to-end process and flow. And so for the Fortune 2000 that we tend to help, it's really three things. One, private data, it's sort of the next frontier. And so the idea that all of the foundation models, all of the public data has already been indexed and it's there. Two, it's data access, essentially a portfolio of really high quality connectivity of just connectors to Salesforce, to Oracle, to MySQL, to databases, et cetera. And then the third part is really what gives CISOs heartburn, is this idea of ultra fine-grained permission. So by definition, most systems were built before agents, right? Because agent is a new thing. And typically access to these systems were root access. So you get kind of all or nothing. And so this idea of ultra fine-grained permissions, those are, I think, are the three pillars that are preventing people from adopting these agentic systems.
So, I mean, just to follow up on that, is that, I mean, the most prized possession of any enterprise is their data. I mean, that's really the thing that now differentiates any company from any other company, is their data. So I think what you're saying is that what you're there for is to really sort of help them protect that treasure?
Yeah. Well, it's just unlocking the data.
I mean,
so,
yeah, of course.
Effectively, okay, so if private data is your next frontier, and let's say that you want to build a note-taking agent, or like a Salesforce agent, or whatever, a finance agent, those agents need to get access to your data. But most of the data is behind your firewall, right? And so it's like, how do you help people unlock access to, I guess in our case, it's 310 portfolio of connectors to old protocols, whether it's like database protocols or queues protocols or file semantics or your Git repos or your private wikis or whatever. How do you make sure that that data is actually accessed by the right thing at the right time, and make sure it's covered with access control policies, et cetera. And so those, I think, are the requirements for large-scale enterprises to adopt agents, is making sure that your private data is being unlocked, because that's the next frontier. And two is making sure that it's being unlocked securely, right? So with data access, policy enforcement, et cetera.
Okay. But David, there's a lot of talk about, anything that's sort of generative AI based. We talk about it sometimes. I mean, it has all this potential, but at the same time, sometimes it goes off the rails. I was just in your business, it seems like that could be something rather, rather spicy little moments if going off the rails. I was just wondering, especially going into an agentic world, how do you look at that?
I think one is what Alex talked about. It's having the permissioning structure that's set up correctly, that makes sure you can't go look up somebody else's data and say how much do they make, how much vacation time do they take, and those are table stakes. People don't need to worry about it as much because what's happening is you're seeing more and more of these startups, even these enterprise companies coming and saying, we have to bring the permissions into play. What we do that's a little bit different is we do those enterprise permissions, but we take more of a social networking approach. So this is the idea of like everyone has Instagram. You could either publish a story to everybody in the world, you could do it to your close friends, all of your friends, or send it to one person as a direct message. So when I have a meeting, I can decide, hey, I want to send this to the entire sales team because it's a great pitch, or hey, I had a customer interview, I want to send it to the product team, or hey, this customer complained, I want to send this to the account manager that was working on the account. That level of permissioning is the thing that I think is key, and I think the social network portion, people understand. So when you go in and you say like, it's not IT going in and saying, I have access to all of your emails, all of your messages, and your boss could look at them. It's more like, hey boss, here's 4 reports that I just had with a client, here's a couple of emails, and then letting the AI and the agent go in and sift through that and say, okay, here are the takeaways, here's what you need to understand as the next step.
Right. So, but, you know, sometimes things do happen, or sometimes someone thinks that something happened and someone else disagrees. And if you're human, if your agent was a human, you'd say, hey, human, you know, tell me what happened. With an AI agent, Alex, how do you do that? I mean, how can you be sure that the technology can sort of give you a write-up of what actually went down?
Yeah, so let's talk about a real use case. So we powered 2 of the top 5 banks in the US, right, as an example. And let's say that my wife and I are applying to a credit card application, right? You want to make sure that the model doesn't have some sort of like gender bias that says Alex gets the credit and the other person doesn't, right? And so it's like, it's not enough to record metadata, which tends to be the, like, okay, what accessed it, when was it accessed, by whom was it accessed. They tend to be, it's just around like what happened right on the data. You also need to record the inputs of the data, enrich with like, okay, at this time, this was the application, this was also the metadata and access, this was the model decision, and by the way, here's the full function trace of all of the other models, the MCP connectors, like, okay, what data sources did this credit application actually fetch? Did it fetch the user database? Did it fetch like the 3 credit bureaus? And ultimately the decision. And so I guess what is the shift between before agents and with agents for these large enterprises? It's not enough to record metadata. You actually have to record the entire transaction. And so what tends to be really helpful for enterprises is this idea of a distributed log, an immutable log of events that record everything. So the inputs, the outputs, the models, the connectors, the metadata, the access policies, et cetera. So I think that's what's giving people confidence and transparency. It's like, I can actually trust this black box, by the way, that nobody really understands. Like, no one knows how to activate the neurons specifically, but at least you're able to go back and make sense of it. So if you get audited, you're like, no, the model doesn't have a gender bias. Here's the result.
Do you have similar issues for your software?
The way that we look at it is we have a product called Search Copilot. You can go in and type in a word, or you can say like, hey, for the last 500 customer interviews, can you tell me who canceled their account within 30 days? What were the features that they requested or said they didn't like about the product? It will generate those results. And it's like, hey, this is great, but you don't know what's the background, what's the reason why this is coming through. So we've got this concept called citations, and you just go in and you turn it on, and it gives you the raw data, and it drops you into the meeting report where you can actually see the video clip. It will show you the email that says this is where the customer complained, and then here's the log that said they actually canceled. So showing that proof is just like what you would do on Wikipedia, where you go in and you look at the bottom of the page and say, this doesn't sound right, or this actually is right, but I just want to confirm. You can click on that and actually do that yourself. And I think there's a lot of logs that you could have, but the problem with logs is like, no one looks at them. It's like the fine print when you do the terms of service. You just want to have it right next to the information and say, is this right or wrong? If it's wrong, you can go in and actually chat with it and remove it.
Is this sort of when we describe, keeping humans in the loop? Is this sort of what we're talking about? Is this the way that we keep humans in the loop?
Well, so I guess on an architectural perspective, there is, for those of us that have been writing software for a long time, there's this idea of a dead letter queue, right? And actually, this idea of a human in the loop is that for the credit application example, if you have a credit score that is 800 and you're applying for a credit line that is $300, or if you have $1 million in the bank and you want to make a transaction for whatever $600 worth of credit, then it's a no-brainer. Like don't involve a human.
Right.
Obviously, it's fine to do it. Exactly. But what happens is at the edges, like what happens when you want to make sure that, oh, hey, this profile doesn't look like it's
Close
centered.
call.
Yeah. And so the systems for humans in the loop, that has been an architectural paradigm that has been solved for a long time under a totally different name, more nerdy, usually called dead letter Q, which is like you put it on the side and then you go back to it later. And so in specific for this credit card company analogy, which is a real system, by the way, you kind of stash it on the way, and that will usually trigger a Slack notification or an email notification that says, hey, please go check this credit application. And so that's how we're seeing in practice, in production, at large scale for the global Fortune 2000 systems working for them.
And where we see it as more, it's a manager. You are the manager, or the man in the middle, the person in the middle is a manager, and those agents are your employees. So you go out and you have them do specific tasks. And you don't need to know exactly what they're doing every single day, but those agents have a task assigned to them. So one example might be to go in and say, hey, take meeting notes. Another might be like, hey, when there's a sales opportunity that changes, I want you to give me an update that gives me a recommendation that says, hey, you should move this from a 50% chance it's going to close to a 75% chance it's going to close. You can't know that through a chat question unless you say, hey, for every client, can you give me an update against this? And you have to keep running the chat. But the agent can start to do that on its own. And I think that's where the person in the middle goes in and says, hey, do I agree with this? Yes, and now I agree with it. I'm going to put this into production, and I am responsible for that now. So that is the key. Like, someone is responsible at the end of the day versus just letting it run wild. Now, ask me this question in 2 years, probably going to be very different. But right now, it is the person in the middle.
Right, gotcha. I wanted to ask you, as we have a little bit more time, is about your relationships with the big players. Like, for example, I know with Read AI is that you guys are, work with Microsoft, you work, how do you negotiate that relationship in terms of just sort of like being both someone who depends and works with them, and at the same time, being a potential rival? How does that play out?
One thing that's been great is Microsoft, OpenAI, Google, et cetera, they're all pushing AI. So if you've done tech 10 years ago, there was a whole curve around education where you had to educate the entire market on this technology stack. You'd have to go to conferences and talk about it. Now these trillion-dollar companies are going in and educating the entire market and saying, AI is important, AI is fundamentally what you should do every day. And when they start using those tools, they say, hey, this is kind of missing, or this isn't doing the job that I would do. And it makes them go out and discover new tools like Read AI. But what we're finding, when they find those new tools, they're kind of like, this is great, can you do more things? And it's been kind of this loop to say, hey, I want more out of this. How do I get more information? And for those partners that we work with Microsoft, we're one of the most popular apps in their app store. Same thing with Zoom, same thing with Google Meet, where they put us in front of 200 million MAUs on their platform. They do that because then we feed their data. They still own the platform. We're not trying to take over the platform. And we're making that data distributed. So people have more focused meetings, more engaged meetings. And that information goes into different CRM systems. And just one example that we have is we launched a product called Sales AGI, and AGI is a little bit of a stretch, but what it does is it goes in and says, hey, in your history of your company, here's all the deals that you closed. Everyone's kind of tagged the emails, the messages, the meetings. We'll go back and actually build a model, but we'll look at the raw data, and we'll start to predict what's going to happen next. We've already pushed through $10 million in recommendations with a pilot of only a few hundred customers in less than 30 days. So this is people going and saying, like, if you solve a problem for me that cleans up hygiene that I don't want to do, all day long I will enable that. And the CRM systems love it because now they're more engaged.
Gotcha. How about you?
I guess for Redpanda, we're more on the infrastructure side. So we tend to power companies like Read.ai as an example. But since the early days, we power a couple of foundation model companies. So Poolside.ai, who I think raised over $500 million recently, and Midjourney is also one of our customers. And so we power both people building the models as well as people using those models. And we sort of span the full stack. And so it turns out that for training foundation models, an event-driven architecture is a very natural thing. And the example I like to give people is it's not like basically badge is a historical artifact of how we got here. It doesn't make any sense for 100,000 people to make a single transaction at the exact same microseconds. It obviously doesn't happen, right? People buy laptops at the Apple Store throughout the day. And so modeling the world like that is very natural. In fact, we know, for example, OpenAI uses an open source alternative to someone like Redpanda.
Right.
And so we've been, I guess, in touch with the next generation model companies. And so we get to a little bit of a sneak preview of what's coming. And so we are very much a partner in that. We don't see us competing with them necessarily. We're still on the infrastructure side. And so what we get to do is we get to take those learnings and then go partner with some of the world's largest companies and be like, hey, if you want to fix your autopilot, can't tell you why, but like you should think about the world is slightly different. Right. And so for us, it's less direct competition and really very much complementary to the things that they're doing behind the scenes.
Maybe really quickly, I have a little bit of time left. I just was wondering, like, when companies are looking into the agentic space, like, and they come to your company because that's what they're looking for from you, what is your message to them?
Focus in on the outcomes. If you just focus in and say, hey, I know this panel's about agents, but it's like, hey, I'm going to do agents for the sake of agents. That's like 4 years ago or 3 years ago, and probably at this conference and many others where you're talking about crypto and how do I apply the blockchain to this. Nobody doesn't solve a problem. I don't need the blockchain for my mortgage. I already have a really good solution. So with agents, solve real problems versus trying to force that.
When a new bank comes into your office and says, hey, what are we doing here? What do you say?
Yeah. Largely, it's about focusing them on moving from prototype to a real production system.
Right.
And what moves the needle for them is actually all of the boring things that it's undifferentiated for them, but for a vendor, it's like the thing that we do, right? So how do you make sure you log into your OpenID Connect? So make sure that your account authentication maps to the principles of the agents actually being deployed in production. How do you make sure that you're tracking? And so all of the provisioning, all of the authentication, the authorization. By the way, dynamism as a function of accessing data for private data sets, it's hard. It's, I don't know many companies doing that. So we tend to focus on that set of problems. I think getting to a prototype is relatively straightforward. You can go to a coding thing today and in 20 minutes get something up and running. But getting it to production is hard. Yeah. And so that's why we tend to focus on the conversation.
Gotcha. Well, that's perfect. We have to leave it there. But thanks a lot for your time, guys. That was great. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Al.